everybody. Let's restart again. Thank you for sticking around. And we'll hear about primordial legal origins.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for making it this far. So my name is Giacomo Benati. I work in economic history at the University of Barcelona, and the paper that I'm going to present to you stems from a long-standing collaboration that I had with Carmine. We started in 2018 working together. So this is one of our latest installments, so we had a number of rounds of funding, and this is from this is work that has been funded by the Italian Ministry of University to study the origins and evolution of legal and fiscal systems in the ancient world. So today we're going to present you this very preliminary paper on the origins and evolution of legal systems in ancient Mesopotamia. Okay. So I will try to keep it very, very light. So I will give you some ideas about theory, the evidence that we have and the data, and Carmine is going to kill you with theory. Okay. So it's going to be like a good cop, bad cop situation. So where do we start? So basically, one of the key questions in law and economics comparative law is try to understand why different societies adopt different legal systems to achieve the goal of maximizing the citizens' wealth. So, and we have, I will be very brief on literature review. So we have two key literatures here. One is called legal tradition, which says that legal systems are shaped by a mix of lawmaking and adjudication institutions. And they range from fully centralized, like in the French civil law system, okay, everybody's familiar with. So from fully centralized to pure common law system, like here in the UK. And the other literature, which is very one of the most influential literature in social sciences, legal origins, that says that legal traditions have been shaped by colonization. Okay, so basically, the traditions that we have today have been shaped by the effect of European colonization. And also this literature links the common law system, the centralized system, with better economic outcomes, and everybody knows about this. So, however, even though this literature is super influential, scholars have been singling out issues, problems. The two key problems with the literature are related to measurement of legal traditions and persistence. So, for example, people are starting to ask whether the measurement exercise that the legal tradition, the legal origins literature uses is actually capturing the complexity of legal rules. So they use dummies for distinguishing between common law and civil law and hybrid systems. So are these dummies actually capturing the complexity of the legal traditions? And the second problem is persistence. So do legal traditions change over time, or they remain the same from the point in which they are transplanted from colonizers on? Because we can observe changes over time. Okay. So we set off from a theoretical point of view. We set from a previous contribution. So Carmine has worked on this at length, and he has studied 155 cases of institutional transplants of legal traditions, and he says in the data, he finds in the data that the common law system prevails when there is a large genetic distance between the origins and the point of transplant, while the civil law centralized system prevails when the political quality is very high. Okay, so these two things are going to be key. When there is genetic distance, common law. When there is high political quality, civil law. Okay, but there is a problem in all this story, which is that colonization affects a whole bunch of outcomes, among which political institutions. So it's very difficult to credibly isolate the effect of colonization on legal systems. So what we decided to do is to take a step back and try to study a kind of a simpler setting in which it is easier to observe causality running from, for example, geography to agricultural production and political and legal institutions. So I decided to study the society that in history presents the first case of recorded legal institution, which is that of Bronze Age Mesopotamia. Okay, so Bronze Age Mesopotamia is an amazing case study because we have primacy. So these are the first cases of recorded legal tradition in human history, and the land. So basically, we have, because of the durability of the medium that they used to write on, clay, we have 3,000 years of recorded human history. Okay, because they started to record contracts around 3200 BCE, and we have like 3,000 years of recorded history for legal system. Okay, so we focus on the early and middle Bronze Age, and I will tell you later more details about the sample. And we focus on 44 major city-based polities that evolved in this phase, and we document changes in legal traditions in each polity based on the Mesopotamian sources. What we see is that basically the prevailing case over our sample is that of a kind of mixed civil law situation in which we have a single court that does the lawmaking and the adjudication. But during the Akkadian Empire, and I will give you more details about this, we witnessed a shift from civil law to a case of common law, which we call primordial common law, as opposed to primordial civil law. So during the Akkadian Empire, when Sargon of Akkad conquers southern Mesopotamia, creates the first empire in world history, we have a switch from civil law to common law. And we see that in this period, what happens is that, consistent with the previous work that I cited, we have an increase of ethnic mixture. So there are migration waves that increase the heterogeneity of the population. And because of the formation of the empire, the political process becomes less inclusive. So more centralized states, more diverse preferences because of ethnic mixture, switch to common law. Okay, this is what we see in there. So let me give you just 3 key theoretical points, and then Carmine will elaborate more on the model from technical point of view. So basically, we see 2 key situations, as I said before. The predominant pattern is that of a mixed civil law system in which we have single courts, which are populated by either the king or notables that both produce lawmaking and adjudicate. And then we have another case, which is the alternative, which is this primordial common law system, which is consisting of 3 bundles of institutions. The first one is that in this imperial phase, we see that especially the peripheral polities that before were independent and then get absorbed into the empire, prefer to transfer more resources to the emperor in terms of taxes, and have lawmaking carried out by local courts that treat as binding previous decisions and royal ruling, instead of obey to a centrally sent governor that can be biased because the governor can side with one of our groups and can be corrupted. Okay, so they decide, let's pay more the emperor, have local courts that have binding decision instead of having to obey to a government. The second bundle of institutions is that of flexible education. So instead of relying on statutes, that's in a phase in which political quality is not good, so inclusivity goes down, and statutes are more volatile. These people prefer to have judge-made law, because the judge-made law is less biased than the volatility of the statutes. And the third bundle is that of the inquisitorial proceeding. So basically, inquisitorial, which is when the court go find out about what happened in reality. So instead of having a situation like in the centralized order in which the defendants bring the evidence to to the court. And in this case, in the inquisitorial case, it is the court that goes out and finds the evidence. So in a society in which there are a lot of information asymmetries because references are dispersed, it is very costly to gather evidence. So it is so the court has an incentive to go find out what happened. And then we will see more technically what happens in the model. Let me give you some stylized fact, and then Carmina will present you the theoretical part. Yeah.
So just clarify. So you're applying this kind of concepts of Roman civil law and common law. If I understand correctly, kind of the perspective here, right?
Yeah.
So kind of ancient civilizations.
Yeah, well, these are categories. So we will see when I show you how we measure them. So basically what we are interested in finding out is what part of the spectrum. So basically you have a spectrum that goes from centralized to decentralized. Okay. Yeah.
What I mentioned that we could be focusing on such as centralization in which we can see things as a continuum and or a spectrum.
Yeah.
So in centralization, the key issue that distinguishes civil and common law before and then with this like turn for coin property and
I think that there's both in the sense that we want to see whether legal systems were more or less centralized, but we are also looking into the different, we are unbundling, and I will show you the way that we measure this degree, and we look at different aspects. So we have 5 dummies to capture both the centralization of lawmaking and decentralization level of the adjudication. So we measure both. Okay.
Following up on this, so you're applying these concepts sort of retrospectively, but also not just in the past, but also in a world where presumably enforcement was completely different. State capacity was pretty different. So can you speak a little to this? Because I would find it interesting to know, because just as a motivation for this question, when enforcement is very little, then the differences between common and civil law and whether they matter is very different from when enforcement is very.
As a matter of fact, when you go through the way that these proceedings and the court were shaped, that not so different from what we see, for example, in the Roman period.
And even in the medieval period. I mean, it wouldn't be too different from medieval common law, the one that we use.
And in terms of capacity, also you think?
Oh yeah, they had also jails and bailiffs, and so it was super complex. But let me give you more details about the historical evidence. So basically, let me give you some stylized facts. So there are two key movements in the data that we see across the early and the middle Bronze Age. So at the beginning, we have these 2 things that move. So basically, there is a increasing aridity in the first part of the samples and first part of the first half of the third millennium, and the political process becomes more inclusive. And then I will tell you how we measure the political process. And in this phase, we see the rise of a centralized legal law, so kind of civil law system. And then in the second part of the sample, we see increasing ethnic mixture because of waves of migration. And I will tell you how we measure this, which deters the adoption of the centralized order and fosters reforms toward the decentralized one. Okay, so we see these 2 things happening. So this is the sample. So we have 44 Mesopotamian polities that are distributed across this called Fertile Crescent. And the main difference is that the ones in the north rely on rain-fed farming, the ones in the south rely on irrigation. And these are all occupied cities that at the beginning of our evolution are city-based states, or city-states with a small catchment. Then eventually they become kingdoms, part of empires, and then so there are movements, and then I'll show you. And we measure these city-based institutions at quality level for each 50 years across the time frame from 3050 to 1750, which is the data. Okay, so a little bit about history. So we divide our time frame into 3 big chunks. So in the first phase, which is the so-called pre-Sargonic period, so everything happens before the formation of the Akkadian Empire. So from 3100 to 2300, we have this series of droughts which increase the aridity of the area, which increase the value of canalization, and and this thing pushes the transfer of political power from landholding elites to temples, because temples had the capacity to organize collective work. So the temple is the first institutionalized decision maker. Then we had the formation of Sumerian city-states in the south, which were city-based polities ruled by religious elites at first. Then we have the rise of military ranks and in the second phase. And these city-based polities in the south are, from the ethnic point of view, are very homogeneous. These are all Sumerian speakers. While in the north, there's a little bit of lag. We have the rise of extended royal families that fund palaces, supported by religious elite and elders. And if the ones in the north, so for example, these ones in the north are Semitic speaking, the ones in the south, in the first phase of the sample, are Sumerian speaking. There is a little bit of mixture here in the north, but for the first part of the sample, this is very homogeneous. Okay. And so the first legal traditions that we find in the first part of the sample can be rubricated as defined as a kind of mixed civil law system. So adjudication is carried out by adjudication and lawmaking is indistinguishable in the sense that it is carried out by the same court. So we have a single court in which maybe there is a king that is sitting, or high nobles of top executives, and they do everything from lawmaking to adjudication. They also hear appeals in front of the king. Compensation is often prescribed according to equitable judgment. So the king does not punish the full extent of the law. Yeah.
It's not exactly what it means for something to be civil law if the same person is making the law and enforcing the law. Doesn't that kind of seem like they can, it seems a bit like common law to me.
No, common law would be that you have two courts and they are changing the rules in a way to interact with the other courts. So that would be a common law system. Whereas civil law is that the king select a punishment and then they stick until some technological shock doesn't change the rule, which is what happens in our civil law country.
But I guess if there was only one court, common law would look like what you're saying. And then
no, common law, we intend common law. So the main difference of common law is that the main aspect of common law is the fact that there are courts that actually overrule each other. So the preferences of different courts enter into the law. That's the
but if there's a single court with the king in it, how can you have either? How can it be either one or the other? They're indistinguishable.
No, so we have a situation in which we have two courts that actually play each other when we have the empire. So we're going to have a centralized court, a peripheral court, and they're going to play against each other. That is the first instance of common law in history.
Exactly, because as when you're saying conceptually, it's not possible.
Yeah. At the beginning, it was not possible to have common law. It was invented in the middle of the simple. That's what we're saying. So we are identifying the first moment in which it was invented. This is the first society. This is the first time in which it was invented.
So is size a precondition for common law the way you think about it? So small, so it has to be.
It has to be a union of polities.
Right, so the other characteristics are of this mixed primordial civil law are that there is equitable judgment by the king. Evidence is brought directly by the parties in oral form. Okay, so this is the big, and this we know from judicial proceedings. People report that testimonies came to court. Then we have a second phase in which we have the shift from civil law to common law. Which is the formation of the Akkadian empires. As before, we have this king, Sultan of Akkad, that conquers the southern city-states and forms the first empire in world history. So what happens is that the formerly independent city-states become capitals of provinces, and they have a governor that at the beginning is a former ruler. Then they send governors from the center. And he rules in conjunction with other local elites, could be temples, could be magnates. And in this phase, there is an increasing flow of people, Semitic-speaking people from the north into the south, whether they are followers of Akkadian rulers or whatever. And so there is an increase of ethnic mixture. And we have the switch from civil to it's called primordial. So, especially here in the periphery, we have peripheral courts that decide with by using as binding the kings and local rule proceedings. There is lack of appeal before the king. Similar to the previous period, we have a judgment. In this case, the evidence is gathered by the courts through royal officers. It's not brought in by the parties, but it's collected by the court. We have these agents, which is called mashkim. And then again, the proceedings are still. Then what happens after 2100 is that so the Akkadian Empire collapses for a variety of reasons. Then we have the formation of, there is a brief period of chaos. Then there is formation of another empire, the Utri Empire, which is again another strongly centralized empire. Then the Utri Empire collapses around 2000, and we have fragmentation with the rise of Amorite polities, so basically territorial kingdoms and small city-states. So in this very unstable situation, what we have is that we have a series of migration waves, the most famous of which is the migration of the Amorites, which are Semitic-speaking, semi-nomadic population that was settled in northern Syria, that because of climate becomes to move to the south. And then there are other populations move in Anatolia, like the Hurrians and the Hittites. So at the beginning, we have a strong empire, then we have a drive towards more inclusive political institution, because when we have the fragmentation of territorial kingdoms, we witness the rise of city-based institutions, like we have city councils that can oppose the king. And here we have again a switch towards a mixed civil law system. Okay, so lawmaking is carried out by local courts that are usually identical to these city-based assemblies. At the beginning, with the Utri period, there is a lack of appeal from the king, and then in the Old Babylonian period, it is reintroduced, equitable judgment. At first, there is the inquisitorial process, then it switches to adversarial, and at the beginning, it's oral, and then it becomes also possible to introduce written proofs, okay? So these are the three key patterns that we see in historical data. So this is nicely, you can see very nicely in this part. So we divided irrigated from rain-fed polities, so south and north. And so these are the trends of the variable that we study, and this is very clear. So at the beginning of the sample until 2350, what we see is that there is a rise of the inclusivity of political institution compared to the beginning. The social heterogeneity is very low. Then this and the system is civil law. Okay. Then what happens in the after 2300, which is when the empires start to rise, is that we have a drop in the inclusivity of political institutions because the empire conquered the former city-state, a rise in the heterogeneity of society, with more dispersed preferences, and a rise of communism. Okay. Then again, what happens in the last part is that we have an increase of political inclusivity with the formation of the city-based assemblies. Heterogeneity stay pretty much the same, and then we have a decrease of common law because we have again this mixed civil law system, right? So it's not this need, but functions in the city. So Kanye is going to give you some technical details about
just intuition, because otherwise it becomes too taxing on you. So let me just give you an intuition of how the two systems will work. So this is a world in which we have cases which are commanded by two dimensions. So one dimension you can call it A, one dimension you can call it D. Think about, for example, trespassing the land of someone else. Okay, so the court doesn't observe the D, it just observes the A. Okay, so the lawmaker has just to select the level of a threshold, the level of A, such that all the cases such that A is bigger than this A upper bar are going to lead to punishment. Okay, so the idea is that whenever the sum of the two elements A plus D, the two dimension is bigger than one, so when we live in this triangle, there should be punishment. Okay, but given that I cannot observe the D, I just can select the level of A, which is going to produce false positive and false negative. Okay, then there is a technological ratio of the cost of a false positive or a false negative, which is lambda in our model. But then there are also cultural biases. Okay, so there are people that actually believe that trespassing is not a big deal. So think about merchants. I mean, merchants do not have land, so they do not possess land, so they're not really caring about the fact of having someone trespassing the land of someone else. So they want that there is very little punishment, so they want to have an A which is very large. Then there are temples, so they just possess land, so they just run these big farming firms, so they want to have an A which is very smooth. Okay. Then there is some group in the middle, the palace, which is technologically concerned. So they just care about what is the real relative cost of false positive and false negative. So totality at the end is gonna maximize the weighted average of these concern, which are essentially at the end in equilibrium are gonna be just a distance between the rule that is gonna prevail and the rule that you prefer as a cultural group. So the cost of each long run rule that we're going to select is just going to be given by the volatility of the flow and the bias of the flow. So how different it is from the compromise of three groups. Yes.
The choice to think of this as like maximizing social welfare, is that like, you think of that as like a group evolution kind of thing, or group competition or something, or why not just maximize the ruler's welfare?
Because it's the same. So whatever,
empire,
yeah. So whatever you as an emperor can obtain from the group, yeah. Okay. So what are the models that we are gonna compare? So there is this model of statute law. Okay. So there is this legislator, this king with his other representative of the groups that can decide to either select the optimal compromise between the rule, so the optimal law, or actually say, okay, let's see what the group that are affected by this law are going to give me. So I'm going to distort the law whenever I wish that, whenever I actually prefer to receive some bribes instead of maximizing the social. So what is going to happen essentially is that when the heterogeneity is smaller, okay, the rule that is going to prevail is going to be the optimal one. So this centralized system, this statute law system is going to be optimal. Okay, it's going to give you the optimal compromise between us without uncertainty. Okay, so civil law is going to be better. When instead the heterogeneity preferences become sufficiently large and becomes actually larger than these thresholds which are decreasing in quality of the political process, then the legislator is going to favor one of the two groups. In particular, it's going to favor those that are more extremist. Okay, so when things goes wrong in the centralized system, you're going to see a legislator that actually helps the group which is more extremist. Okay, because it's the group that is going to transfer more bribes. So the centralized system works well when we are we more or less think about the world in the same way, when the political process is sufficiently good. And the alternative is this decentralized system, in which you have two courts. So each court is going to be endowed by a preference. In the particular primordial legal system that we observe, essentially the court is going to be either one of the group taken from the periphery, or the king or the emperor. Okay, so what is going to happen is that in equilibrium you're going to have a rule that is going to be volatile. So each of them is going to change each time the threshold try to trying to obtain the rule which is best for his cultural biases. And this volatility is going to be decreasing with the cost of respecting the precedent of the previous judge. And essentially, we're going to have a rule which is going to be an average between preferences of the periphery, which is the optimal rule, and the rule preferred by the emperor. So why this is better than having a governor? Because the governor is going to come, is going to pick the group which is the most extremist, is going to praise this group, is going to decide for a rule which is very, very, very distorted, and this is bad. Okay, so you prefer actually to have something in between, what is the preferences of the groups and what is the preference of the emperor. And the larger is the heterogeneity, the more you would prefer this decentralized situation. What we can say instead about adjudication, discretion, so we see discretion as the possibility for the parties, the defendant and the plaintiff, to reveal some information, to manipulate information in such a way that the court is not going to see the A, but it's gonna see something which is A plus or minus some parameter. So why we see a discretion going with the centralized system? We see discretion going with the centralized system because this creates some negative covariance. Okay, so I distort the law, but then I know that the other guy, the parties are going to distort the law in the opposite way. This creates a negative correlation, so this decreases the volatility of the centralized system. Whereas under the centralized system, discretion is no good because the legislator is going to understand what is going to happen, so it's going to neutralize this incentive, but it's going to create volatility. Finally, concerning information gathering, okay, we think about a situation in which you can learn the dimension which is unobserved, but you have to pay a cost. So what is the system that is going to produce more incentive to learn the reality? So the centralized system is not going to care because they already, when it prevails, we have low heterogeneity, high quality of the process, you're obtaining the socially efficient rule, so you don't want to learn more information. So in that case, it's better if you leave to the parties the gathering of information. Instead, when you have the centralized system, you have a lot of heterogeneity in less inclusive political process, and then you want to have actually the court trying to understand the reality because the loss from having this court is large. So let me conclude just with one comment on the institution. So why we actually observe that there was common law under the Akkadian Empire, but we don't observe so much common law in the other empires. So the intuition is the following. So there are two things that actually explain this. So first thing is that during the second part of the empires, we have institution, political institution which is higher. Okay. So the distortion coming from civil law are smaller. And then the other reason is that in this second part of the sample, we have strong empires. So when you actually select the centralized system, you're gonna produce laws which are an average between the preference of the population and the preference of an emperor, which is very biased. Okay, so that's why we see this. Okay, so let's conclude with the empirical analysis. Yeah.
Let me give you something about the data and the results that we have that are very preliminary, but right. So how do we capture the level of centralization of the legal process? So we have analyzed more than 100 cuneiform texts reporting judicial decision by working with experts of theology, and we also consulted more than 100 secondary sources that document the variations in the legal structure of our polities. So we have, and we created 5 dummies that capture both lawmaking and justification process. So we have case which is positive when there are local courts that abide precedents, appeal for lack of appeal before the king, equity when ruling is based on equity grounds, oral when written evidence is inadmissible, adversarial, and then we have another variable that is normalized principal component extracted from the 5 data. Okay, so these are the main outcomes. Then we have 2 main exploratory variables, which are the quality of the political process. So basically, and this comes from previous contribution that we published in 2022. So basically, we measure the level of division of decision making in every polity. So basically, we capture whether there is only one active decision maker in each polity, or whether political power is more widespread in society. So, for example, think about a situation in which you have only a king or only a temple, and there is no other institutional decision making. So power is more concentrated. Where on the other side, we can have a situation in which there is a king that rules in conjunction with the temple and the merchant court, right? So in this second situation, the power is more widespread. So this is a continuous variable that ranges from 1 to 5. Then we measure the level of heterogeneity in our societies by analyzing. We are still analyzing more than 20,000 names of citizens from our polities that have been recorded in different kinds of sources, whether it is institutional sources with list of employees or whether these are private sources. And we match by working with sociologists. We match each name with a ethno-linguistic group. So in this case, it's not. So we talk about ethno-linguistic groups in the sense that we can say that based on their names, these people were pertaining to one or other speaking groups, but we are not claiming that this is a captured ethnicity. And then we calculate a standard ethno-linguistic fractalization. Okay. So critical design. So basically, what we want to do is to link our outcomes, legal traditions, with the drivers, which are the inclusivity of the political process and heterogeneity, and then we control for a bunch of confounders. So these are the regression tables. So the baseline shows you that all the coefficients of our outcomes are consistent with theory. So the quality of the political process is negatively correlated with common law system. So the lower the quality of the political process. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about your observations. So you have 1,188, and the variable was constructed from 150 texts. So how many texts? So
so we analyze more than 125 primary sources plus more than 200 secondary.
150.
okay.
Everything. The universe of what has been written, we did it.
But for every, let's say for the year 2815, there might not be any text speaking specifically about that year, but you don't treat this as a missing observation. You sort of treat it as nothing changes.
Yeah, it depends. So when we don't have an observation from a polity, we look for the closest polity, and we see whether the case is applicable. But we also want to control for the validity of text. So the idea is that you can kind of fill in the information with the closest observation that you have if this is consistent. So for example, if a polity is located inside a kingdom and you have a mixing observation from one polity, but you have all the other ones, it's plausible that, you know.
I think it would be really helpful to just know what are the actual observations and how much is constructed around to have like a figure or something like that.
No, we are working on that to figure out what's missing and to also test by taking out whatever is missing and only use certain observation to see whether the patterns are right.
But sometimes the secondary sources is giving the information.
So both political process and heterogeneity drive legal tradition as predicted by theory. Then we do a bunch of controls by introducing politicized conflicts and culture. Let me explain a little bit about. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So the observations are at the level of case.
No, at the level of the polity.
Yeah, polity level.
So the case is just telling you what was happening within the polity.
So So if there is any case, is that the first?
So if in any case,
What is the first column?
so case is case law, not case as being a case treated. Case law versus statute law.
Yeah, this is this done. So case is positive when there are local courts abiding to precedents, okay, which corresponds to the common law system.
So we run out of time.
Yeah, right. So if you want to know more about the controls, ask me after. But basically, we can explain what happens here, and everything is robust. We also do causality, we check for reverse causality, and it's no problem. We also instrument because we know that there is a legitimate problem, so we instrument the severity of drought, and that's it.